Welcome back, listeners, to Learning from Friends. My name is Cade Curtis, your tour guide on this lovely adventure that we get to do together twice a month, sometimes 3 times a month, depending upon what's the calendar month period. And as those that are familiar, have been coming in and listening off and on with us here, I do my mom's quote of the day to start the podcast. Mom, take it away.
Nobody thinks less of the penguin because it cannot fly. It's simply a different kind of bird. Different, not less. Stuart Duncan.
Thanks, Mom. A great quote, as usual, getting us starting off to a good tempo for the episode. I think we're now coming up to close to 50 episodes, so I'm pretty proud of that. That's quite impressive. I never imagined that I would be this deep into this by now, but I have a lot of friends, so I have a lot of stories I can be able to collect in here. And as we're going along, it's always interesting to do so, of hearing people's ideas, the things that they can be able to teach us, their experiences that they've gone through in life. And this is another one of those that I'm bringing back a person that I previously had on. And thank you, Zoom, for allowing this to have a good platform to speak with people. Cherokee County, Canton, Georgia, all the way up to Des Moines, Iowa, where I am speaking to my brother-in-law, as we introduced our last time, kind of like connection in there of he's married to my best friend in the entire world. Love Garrison to death. If he hears this at some later of the point, I love you, miss you. And, I'm glad that you're happy with your husband up in Des Moines, and maybe one of these days we'll get you back down here to Georgia for, a couple of weeks and, share a good deep hug. But this episode that we're coming back in from last time we spoke about Dungeons and Dragons, today we're going to talk about Kalevi's experience being queer Lutheran. And so it's very nice to be able to have him come in here and speak and share on his experiences within the Christianity religion and his experience of kind of growing up, because it can be controversial at times for some people. And it can be very confusing too, because all the stereotypes and all these connotations we put on not knowing and not truly allowing to kind of sit and listen. So if you have the opportunity to sit back and listen to this episode, I highly recommend it, because it's going to be a great conversation of just allowing friends to sit back and talk, because that's really what we need more in this world. It's just sitting back, talking, having conversations, and learning from each other. So Kalevi, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, thanks again, Cade. Thanks again.
Now, why did you choose this topic to discuss this today?
Well, if I'm being quite honest, I think if anybody ever wants to do a deep dive into my mind and they come and ask me about something, that's probably about one of the first things that'll come to mind. It's obviously both things are things I live with every day as I go about my normal life. So it's always in the front of my mind, and so I can always talk about it.
And I'm glad that you were willing to sit down and record this with us, because it's an issue that I feel shouldn't be an issue. Like, this shouldn't be a thing that is, but again, everyone has their own politics and they have their own thing. And I respect that. My thing is just sit down on the table and talk. And at the end of the day, walk away, not angry, not frustrated. Just, hey, you're different. I'm different. Let's go for it. Nice. So, not trying to be politically on one side or the other here. That is, if you were taking it that way, I'm sorry. I'm just going to go and put that there. So before we start diving into some of the sides with faith, I want to kind of hear some more of your background, just in general, to kind of unfold a little bit of the story before we get into the faith portion. When did you first discover when you were gay? How long did you wait to also come out?
Well, for some people, that's a really linear story. And for some people, that's very windy and complicated. And I'd say I probably fall a lot more into the latter.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. We got time.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. For sure. Where do we even start? I think I would have to say that I got my first inklings around maybe 3rd or 5th grade. That's a weird interval there, 3rd or 5th, but I literally didn't go to 4th grade. So, I mean, that's how that works.
Because you were so smart, right?
Yeah, that's another topic that I'm not going to get into right now. But
okay.
If I ever have a child, I'm not going to have them skip a grade for a lot of reasons. But anyway, back to the topic at hand, though. It was probably about then that I started realizing, you know what? there's something going on here and I don't really totally understand what it is. And also I was told it was wrong. So I mean, I don't know, maybe it's maybe I'm not really getting this around, or maybe I'm just really curious about things or about like how the body works and everything like that. But all that said, it was about that age that I've ever started becoming aware of it. And then I kept getting a better and better idea of it as time went on. There's definitely a lot of angst and self-flagellation going on, metaphorically, going on, especially growing up in like the religious environment that I did. Very, very evangelical type of environment in the Christian Missionary Alliance. But in that environment, funny enough, though, my church youth group was the first place I actually ever blurted anything out. We were at a youth gathering and we were just having discussion, and that just felt like the thing to get off my chest at the time. I mean, granted, I viewed it very negatively at the time too, so I think that might have been why. But I basically said, "Hey, I'm bisexual," except it turned out I kind of knew that that wasn't the case. And it as time would go on, I would also realize, oh yeah, no. Before I went to undergrad and had some time away from home, away from where I grew up from, to actually have some more time to get in touch myself, and get a better idea of what's really going on. And then kind of what happened too is like I was about no, when was this? January of 2010. So I was just freshly like 19, I think. Oh my God, that's a long time ago.
You know, we are getting a little older, and some people be like, y'all guys are still youngins. And it's like, but we look at people that were when we were in our teens being like, you're in your 30s? Wow, you're old. Yeah, we're in our 30s. So
Yeah.
it is what it is.
We're young, but we're not. We're old, but
Exactly.
we're also not. Yeah.
Exactly.
But it was about then. And it kind of came to a point there where all of a sudden I just like I kind of had to I kind of had a major epiphany. It was basically kind of just like, hey, you know what? All of your experience up to this point has kind of indicated to me that this is this is the creation that God has made. And if he made this, then what's wrong with it exactly? If he made me this way, why would he curse me from there? So he didn't. So that's the point where I finally realized, okay, you know what, dude, you're gay. Just and that's fine, and that's exactly what you should be. And that's like pretty much as soon as I finally hit that one, it's kind of just like I almost immediately started seeing the world differently. And I started telling a couple close friends from there, basically just like, I think I just figured something out. And they're like, okay, yeah, no, awesome, cool, cool. So I had support. I had a lot of support as I was.
That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm so glad I had that, because I know that that's something that a lot of us are missing in the first place. But I got that, and then I decided to blast it out to the world on Facebook a few days later.
Nice. There you go.
So there we were. Yeah. So it's been, oh my God, it's been like 13 years.
Hey, it is what it is. Garrison, whenever he came out to us in college, we were what, 21 at the time. He was almost 20. No, yeah, he hadn't quite turned 22 yet. Maybe he was 20 still. So yeah, around the similar times on that. And I'm so glad that, again, some people have really terrible experiences. Some people have great experiences of, oh yeah, I actually have support. Like, sweet. And you never can tell what you're gonna kind of get. And I'm glad that you had some good support there when you came out, because it can really affect you developmentally as a person.
Yes, absolutely.
And unfortunately, we do live in a society with mental health that people will hold it in, and all of a sudden it becomes high suicide rates in some communities as a result of not having that support. Because if people need to be nourished, and people need to be supported. And I feel like it's not hurting you, and you're not going out there and you're not a mass murderer. But like, at the end of the day, help out your friends. And that's how you know who your true family and true friends kind of are. And that's how we mentioned earlier in the last episode of your family you're born into, that's blood. But you get to choose who your other family is, that's your friends, by who you surround yourself with. So that's always goes a long way. After you came out, what were some struggles that you now face as you go through your daily life that a straight person wouldn't know about or wouldn't think about right out of the gate?
There's a couple things I can think of. First off is that coming out wasn't necessarily one big across the board event, even though I made it sound like that, actually the first time, like in my last statement, because my immediate family took some time to even approach, and even then not every member of that. Like it took me rather some time to talk to my dad about it and everything, and that's probably been my most difficult experience up to this point and everything. But it is what it is, and we're working with it. But the other thing I think is, like, you've kind of, in a way, like, especially early on, and especially where I was up in North Idaho, like, Moscow is a nice town. Like, it's on, like, even though you've got some interesting things going on there, which I won't elaborate on right now, you've also just got a really nice community that really likes to really, it welcomes people in, and it's really tries to look out for its own, I would say. And that was honestly, that was a great place to come of age like that. But even then, it's like I'm still very aware of where I am. Like, I'm in rural Idaho, or even if I'm going back across the border, I'm in rural Washington. You never know exactly what people are going to be thinking or saying or doing, and you gotta and I've always got the idea of, like, gotta keep an eye on my back and everything, and just be careful and such. I mean, which is kind of to also leading into the next thing I'm thinking of too. It's like, coming out isn't something you only do once either. Like, every time you meet a new person, you kind of have to go through the negotiations of coming out also, in a way. Like, in some cases, nowadays when I meet a lot of new people, it's fairly, like, it's basically just a thing that's known right from the beginning, and I don't necessarily pay it any special attention. Or other times it becomes clear that someone wasn't necessarily aware, and then that's when I have to make decisions and about what to say, how much to say, whether to say, all that stuff. So, I mean, in a way, I think the main thing I'd say, there's a lot more self-awareness, self-consciousness that happens, and a lot more vigilance, which for some people, they've had a really bad experience of it and end up with some really hyper vigilant behaviors and statuses also. So, I mean, that's always just something, like, it can be, especially if you don't know exactly where you are or exactly who you are around or what have you, it can be a little hard to just let your guard down.
Yeah, I can entirely believe that. I had a friend that I had known for about 3 years at the time. And at one point, he pulls me off to the side and makes a comment to me, and kind of at that point comes out. And he goes, "Kay, like, I'm sorry that I haven't told you yet at this point. I didn't know if you could be able to, if you would think of me differently." And I look at him and I'm just like, man, now I kind of feel like a jerk of whenever sometimes you say things that you don't know are going to offend somebody or not offend somebody. And my first instinct goes, have I said something that has offended you to the point that you haven't told me for 3 years about this? And I've never thought about that. And I go back and I go, oh my gosh, what have I said anything? Have I done this? Have I done that? And he goes, no. He goes, you've just been really great. He goes, it's, as you said earlier, it's trying to figure out how to drive that ship and kind of make that decision on what to say, what not to say, around who and when. And that's something that I would have never thought about that until that moment when he came out to me after knowing him for 3 years. I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't go there. And some people go their entire lives without having telling anybody and kind of held it in. And you're like, wow, how did you live with that? And that's one of my next questions I was going to lead to is, how did you learn to kind of cope with, like, bullying, harassment, rejection, and hurt because of, in general, your just sexuality?
Well, if I had to be totally honest here, I don't think I've never faced that head on or directly in person, really, which, I mean, I don't know many people who can say that. So, I mean,
Yeah, that's
thanks.
extremely lucky.
Thanks be to God. Yeah, but it's all the same. I mean, it's like, so I mean, like, it's never been an active thing that I really have to deal with other, like, so basically, like, where it does happen in, like, say, random, like, online randos, or like just random people spouting off, or people standing and protesting at Pride or what have you. It's like, that's basically, that's where it's like, okay, like, I can kind of put it out of sight, out of mind. Or there have been times actually, like, when we've been marching in Pride, in the Pride Parade, like, my church here, St. John's Lutheran Church, downtown Des Moines. We do march in Capital City Pride every year, and there have been times when we're coming up off the Capitol grounds, and there are the protesters, the WBC type folks standing out there with, like, all the God hates gays, which he does not. I'm just going to tell you that right now. Stein's out there, and our former pastor, before she retired, she was leading it with us, and she would, we'd have a big song, like, of him basically just singing and like just drowning him out and such. So I mean, it's a little bit, yeah. So I mean, for me, it's a little bit. I'm in a spot where I'm able to not really personally deal with it, not really have to personally deal with it so much as just making sure that, hey, like, making sure that the people around me who can also hear what's going on or also see what's going on, like, have a positive message to take away at the same time.
Yes.
That might be
Always
louder
find
than what's being shouted down. Yeah.
positivity. Power of positivity goes a long way. And when you're drowning out the negativity and you're drowning it out with a positive song that's joyful when it comes to that, that's a great way to be able to counter back. Because of, well, I'm trying to think specifically here of, I have a whiteboard that's on my door, and I always write down a quote every day. And I always try to find some way to philosophically kind of tie it back into, I'm gonna paraphrase of a different quote because I can't think of that one that I put up the other day. It was just like, if you can't say something nice, don't say it at all. At the end of the day, just, the more negativity you put out in the world, the worse it's gonna get. Don't pass it, pass it forward and leave the world a better place than you found it. I wish I could think of that thought. Man, it's gonna bug me now. The moment we get off this call, I'm gonna be like, man, why did I forget that? It's such a great quote. Oh gosh. Now, going backwards with the protesters and stuff through Pride Parade and everything, how can straight people be a good ally to the queer community?
That's a great question that I'm glad you're asking. Number one on the list, always and above everything else, is listen. Like, listen to what we have to say about ourselves, listen to what we're saying, listen to what we're telling you about what people are trying to do to us. Listen, believe, and most importantly, don't take it upon yourself to speak for us. Like, you may know queer people, you may even have close relationships with queer people, but don't take it upon yourself to be an authority on queerness, as it were. Just listen to what we have to say, put forth what we're saying into spaces we can't reach into, like among your own families or among your own cohorts or what have you. But make sure you don't center yourself in the conversation about queerness also, because then it becomes about non-queer people and how we should fit queerness into non-queerness, as it were. So it's kind of just like, if you're going to be an ally to any group and everything, you need to make sure to keep them centered in your allyship rather than putting yourself in the center there, which is a thing that a lot of people can do without being aware of it. So I'm not necessarily saying that you are a terrible person if that's what you do. It's more just like, hey, you've got to maintain some self-awareness about that, and just remember to keep yourself out of the focus.
Love it. Thank you. Great words. It's always good to have our thought processes in order and to be able to kind of properly dictate our words. And speaking for someone else, you don't live in that person's shoes ever. Doesn't matter how anyone, even if it's just like your wife, your husband, you can't speak for them. It's just, you can't do it. You don't know. You may be married them and know them very well. They have their own brain, their own thought process for it. You don't control them. You can't speak entirely for it. So perfect words. Love it. Now that's jumping more into the side of let's go into faith in that kind of direction here.
Uh-huh.
What is the biggest or most common misconception about queer people and faith?
I think the number one biggest one, I mean, it's changed over the 32 years I've been alive or so. But the biggest one I think that's still persisting is just that queer people and faith are not, mutually exclusive. In fact, I mean, I can't remember the specific study or I don't think it was a study. I think it might have been a poll, but I can't remember specifically when it came out or who did it. But I remember seeing a recent one suggesting that the number of people of faith within like the queer community is larger than even a lot of queer people realize. It's actually close to like over 50% or what have you. Granted, there are just as many types of faiths as there are types of people, so that doesn't mean that half the queer people in the country are all Christian or anything like that, because that's not necessarily true. Of course, we have to I definitely have to give acknowledgement and shine a light on siblings in the Jewish tradition and of the Muslim traditions, other like Hindu, Sikh, other people. There's a lot of us out there. It's not just us, and we also need to be very careful not to center Christianity in the talk of religion. That said, Christianity is, of course, the spot in that entire thing that I occupy. So that's what we'll go ahead and stick to that for our conversation about me here. But I think that's just the really big one. Like, just that we do exist, and it's not separate from faith. In fact, we have a lot of integration with it. It's known among a lot of mainline Christianity in the U.S. also that like a lot of people in, say, church music, such as myself, are gay or are queer, I should say. Heck, there's even a lot of queer clergy, which I'm actually fixing to get into as myself.
I'm excited to see how that journey goes along. I'm excited for that.
I'm glad to have you along for it. But queer people are here. We're among you. And even if you don't know it, you might be hurting us by trying to exclude us from those spaces. So that's just the big one I can think of.
Now, what has been your journey? We're going to call it your religious journey in finding the evangelical Lutheran church in America. So I'm sure you didn't grow up Lutheran.
No, sure. So I mean, so like I said, like I actually grew up in the Christian Missionary Alliance and such. So I mean, I was basically in church all my life as a kid, and I would consider myself fairly devout at the time. I got into undergrad and I moved away from home, and there wasn't another church in my denomination in town, so I basically just didn't do anything for a bit and just hung out by myself away from the church, which honestly, I think that was a thing I needed to do because it helped me to, it did help me to not be constrained by all of my old religious shame, as it were, when I was trying to figure myself out. But all that said, I got myself figured out, and I claimed my queerness. I'll put it that way. I like it. I claimed my queerness.
I like that term.
Yeah. And then about that, I was getting up to about that summer, and then I realized the one thing I was really missing. I was absolutely still a Christian, and I never intended to step away from the faith at all. And I realized I was really missing what I was really missing in my life at that point was a community in faith. I wasn't sure I was going to find anything I could really do though. So I mean, I basically just went Googling. I was just like, I don't remember exactly what I put into Google. I think it was like gay friendly churches, Moscow, Idaho, or something. I wasn't really expecting anything. I was thinking, okay, I might have to cross over into Washington to do that. But I had two. There was an Episcopal church in town, and then there was the Lutheran church. I ended up deciding to go I was just like, okay, I'm just going to go check this one out first on a free June weekend, I think it was. I was just like, okay, I'm just going to go check it out and see what it's like. And I'll go check the other one and then make a decision from there. So I go in, and the very first thing, and the worship was definitely rather different than what I was used to at that time. As you,
Yeah.
if you've ever attended,
I know that
service,
one.
yeah. But like I got in, I sat in, I was like, okay, this is all solid, I think. And then like it's a college town church. People are used to seeing college age kids like wandering in and like that they've never seen before. And so of course people were talking to me. It's like, oh hi, what's your name? My name's blah, blah, blah. Like, are you a student? What are you studying? And then of course I start talking about like I'm a music student. And then the one lady that was really talking to me there, in case you're wondering, listening, hi Janet.
Hey.
But but I mentioned, of course, that I play instruments, including like oboe, bassoon, and everything. And she was like, "Oh, that's wonderful. Hey, you might would you ever want to play for church service or what have you? I've got you should come talk to Janet." Which I mean, that's going to sound a little odd because I just said her name was Janet, but there are two Janets there. You should come talk to Janet and see about that. So I did, and before I knew it, I was going back and back and back and back and back, and I was playing for our hymns whenever we were worshiping. So I kind of just got swept right into it, and that's where I was ever since. It also didn't help. I mean, or let me try that again. It didn't hurt that a little bit of time passed, and I realized, oh, wait a minute. So this is the church that my great grandparents went to also.
Oh wow.
Yeah, which I was gonna say. They both I think it was around that time they both actually passed away while I was at school in Moscow. Like they still lived around Moscow. My grandpa's parents, they were like they went there, and I find that out and like, oh, okay, well, I mean, it's like what I mean, that's a sign of anything. But
there's always those weird kind of like paths and things that lead us to the locations, and they were laying the foundation for you in advance. You just didn't know it yet.
Yep. So of course I went from there into Minnesota, the land of the Lutherans, you might say, up there, don't you know? But I went up there, and of course that's where I ended up getting even deeper into the Lutheran tradition, and just sticking with it. And so like basically anywhere I've gone, anywhere I've lived at this point, I've been looking. That's just been my home base always.
And I know you said earlier being very constantly in the church with your upbringing. When you first realized that you were gay, what were some verses in the Bible that you struggled with the most, and how did you reconcile in order to find that peace?
You know, it's kind of funny how difficult of a question this is to answer because it's been so long since I've actually thought about it. But I mean, I think we all have an idea of what at least I mean in the queer Christian world we tend to term them the clobber verses, as in the verses that always get dug out to beat you over the head about like, oh, this is a sin and you shouldn't do it and everything. Which include the gems of like, thou shalt not lie with a man as with a woman, all that stuff. The thing about that was, one, there's actually a documentary coming out about some of this really soon, if it hasn't come out already. 1946, I believe it's called. What it's talking about is like they're in like, I'm absolutely blanking out on where in the Bible it is now, but it's in the Pauline letters. Maybe it's Romans somewhere. I'll look it up and comment later, I guess. But even in the time that the translation of the Revised Standard Edition was being done, there were some Greek words that it seems very much that like Paul might have just made up, as it were, which I mean wouldn't have been unusual in the time, of course. But the difficulty in translating them is that they're not really attested anywhere else, and so we can really only guess at what he might have meant about them. I'm not going to get too deep into that topic because it's not on the forefront of my mind, but you can definitely find information about this elsewhere. Like, so if you look for Kathy Baldock, that's Baldock, the 1946 documentary is coming from a lot of her work, and she definitely has a lot of publication out on the internet and a social media presence that talks some more about this. But suffice it to say, one of those words was kind of just poorly translated to the word homosexual, which it made the passage appear to be a forbiddance on homosexuality or so. And even back at that time, there was actually question about like, based on what we've got here, I actually don't think that's a valid translation of it. And the original translators even going, you know what? I think you're right. We're going to go ahead and get this marked down. We'll get this fixed in later publications, but unfortunately, it's stuck around. I feel like I'm getting a little bit afield from what I was talking about in the first place, but suffice it to say, like, I mean, that was one of the main things that I wouldn't say I struggled with the passage at first. It was more just like learning about the fact that there was even doubt about the translation about it in the first place was the first thing that started making me go, well, something tells me that there's more to a lot of all of this than as far as even like just general understanding interpretation of the Bible. There's more to it than I've been led to believe up to this point. So I need to dig into this more. And also, things might be okay.
There you go. Like whenever I look at religion, and this kind of gets controversial with some people, I go, every religion's got something a little bit right. I think everybody's got something a little bit right throughout the religions here. And are the things that are wrong? There's things that are right. There's things that are wrongs. And with any language and any translation, things are going to get lost in translation.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what's going to happen entirely. And that's a struggle. And sometimes words get misconstrued. Sometimes words get replaced when they shouldn't. And it entirely changes an entire meaning. Like with commas, you put a comma into a sentence of that's eat, grandma. There's a comma there. Okay. Not the comma. That's eat, comma, grandma. Like at the end of the day, it makes a big difference.
Eats, shoots, and leaves.
But yeah, it's there. There you go. So I agree with that. That's a very good way to kind of put in there. With religion, I struggle with it a lot myself. You can look inside the church and you could see with any faith, with any type of system that's out there, is there's going to be judgmental calls that you have to be able to research and learn yourself to figure out, to come with the terms and be able to try to understand something better. And every day we're always learning something new. We're always seeing something that's out there. And you can look at all of history. Everyone has their own perspective of history and it has their own different ideas that are out there. It's just part of it. And unfortunately, some people use it negatively. I think there was a great quote. I can't remember exactly who said it, but it's like, hey, put the Bible down. It's not a weapon. Like at the end of the day, like it's
word.
I can't remember the full quote. It's a great quote. I'll make sure that I put a link to the documentary in there and put in Kathy, a link to Kathy as well, just so you can be able to for those that are listening through, like, wait a second, I need to write that name down. I'll have it in the links in the description so you can be able to find that. Now, continuing off that question here, do you find any theological tensions between the Orthodox faith and the rhetoric of the community of the queer Christians? And also, if so, how do you go about correcting theological errors in a community that is already so wounded and vulnerable because of having grown up kind of battered by this biblical teachings? It's a long-worded question. I really will say that. It's a lot.
Sure.
That one took me a while to kind of get into, of like trying to cut into. Sometimes when I write questions, it's just like an overload of information.
Sure. No worries though. I think I got it picked through here. So first, I just want to make a quick clarification. We're not, so when we say the Orthodox faith, we're not talking about, say, the Eastern Orthodox Church specifically or anything like that. I mean, this is Orthodox as in terms of like what's accepted, considered standard or canonical faith or whatever you might want to call it, as opposed to what might be like heterodox, or what you might be getting into the territory of what you'd call heresy or what have you. So just that quick clarification there. So diving in, yes, the short answer to that first question of whether there's any major theological tensions, yes. Exactly how those might show up is can vary depending on exactly what is being examined. Although in a lot of cases, unfortunately, like the very idea of you can be both queer and have an adherent to the Christian faith is itself considered heterodox, which It's like when that's what we're starting with, it's like, oh, okay, we still have a lot to do here, don't we?
A
Um,
long road still ahead.
yes, yes. So I mean, all that said, it's like it's one of those things where it's like I'd really when it comes to outside our community of queer people and everything, queer Christians, it's like what I'd really like to do is just get started with people and just get them used to the idea that just because it's not what you ever saw growing up or see in your communities right now or what have you, doesn't mean that it's not the case, and doesn't mean that we don't exist, or doesn't mean that we are wrong in our existence. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the times when it comes to dealing with the queer Christian community, dealing with and within itself, the first thing we need to do is tend to our own, because because you're right. I mean, like, so many of us have been battered by bad theology or bad translation, and by people acting in bad faith, or even people acting in good faith but still like just holding to this really hurtful conception of what is right and wrong. A lot of us are still just really so like we still have some very core wounds that we spent a lot of our adult lives even still trying to work through, and we need to spend a lot of our time tending to ourselves and just trying to build ourselves back up into like try to make ourselves whole again. Or I mean, that sounds a little bit strange in terms of Christian theology, but I mean, I'm gonna roll with it anyway. So I mean, it's a tough balance, because you've got to try to, I mean, and it's always an uphill battle, like trying to convince anyone that they're wrong about something. That's never going to be an easy thing to do. And it's even harder to do it when you're still trying to like mend and regroup people into a state where they can work easily with that. But unfortunately, that's kind of the balance we have to strike. So, and in a way I tend to see that play out is that there's a lot of people who focus on like basically tending to and caring for the wounded, and then there's other people whose strengths are better focused on like outreach and, for lack of a better term, like ambassadorship.
Yeah. And knowing your role is hard. Finding that is always a challenge.
Yeah, and what's even trickier too is like you kind of have to play both roles at different times, and you got to kind of know when to do which and how to do it.
Yeah. And the words of Kenny Rogers, you got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. You got to know when to walk away and when to run.
Yeah.
You know, there's always a lot when it comes to making these decisions. And then sometimes fighting the battle may be the most negative thing at that time. It may be, hey, let's come back to this. Let's deal with this. Or, hey, we need to spend more time with this person and letting them find themselves and focus our attention there. It's, again, that back and forth. You may know that you may be a better person to be a healer one day, and as you said, the next day you may be the better communicator for something for out the outreach portion. It's very good, very, very solid deal. And finding that, this is one thing that a lot of people are struggling with, is finding organizations and groups that can be able to kind of help them along those way. What are some religious groups or organizations that you have been involved with or a member of over the years that could really help people out within the queer community that maybe have not had that support elsewhere?
Sure. There's actually a few queer faith organizations out there, and I'm glad for it. Each of them kind of do something different, and I'm not necessarily intimately involved with every last one of them. But the one that I first hit when, like, back in in high school in '06, when I was trying to feel stuff out, and it's like, can you be gay and Christian and all that fun stuff? Like, the first one I hit, of course, was it was known at the time as the Gay Christian Network. It's nowadays known as Q Christian Fellowship. Nowadays, their main focus these days, I would say, is on a lot of our advocacy and making space for queerness among the main parts of society. Like, not necessarily making ourselves palatable for like mainstream society or anything, just making ourselves a place in it. That's a focus they've really turned to in the last few years, and I would definitely encourage, new and coming to grips with all of this for yourself, or trying to figure yourself out and everything, I would say that's a great place to go and start. Like there's different offshoot groups over social media. The website itself, qchristian.org, like will also point you to a lot of community resources and events, as it were. I'm still rather heavily involved with the with our age group from it, and so it's a holdover from the old forum days, but we have like age group breakdown. The one that I fall into is for people born between 1987 to 1991, and so I'm inside of that. We call ourselves the Cinnamon Waffles, and to explain that name would be an entirely different, fascinating, but tangential topic. All that to say, I'm still very heavily involved in that. We make sure we do a in-person retreat each year, and even if the specific topic of faith has been one that we've kind of wandered away from these days, like it is still good to be together. And honestly, I think that's what's important in a lot of this too. It's just building a community, having a community to go to fall back on, to call home.
The hugest thing, community.
Yes.
That's the key word there. Now, that also holds a special place in your heart, because isn't that where you met your husband?
As a matter of fact, yes, that is. Like we were on that same Facebook group, just and posting things. We were basically just like, hey, you post good stuff, and so we just got talking about normal things and everything. It only developed. It was kind of a slow burn. I can put it that way, but sometimes
that's what it takes.
Exactly.
To kindle the fire.
Exactly. And I mean, of course, at the time he was in Ukraine at the time. So I mean, when we first started getting into communication, so I mean that was, and of course that was also right around when Crimea was invaded and such. So and they had to get all the Peace Corps volunteers out, which he was in the Peace Corps. So it's just like, oh God, I hope everything's okay. But yeah, that's definitely where we started out and such. Other places I've been involved and am involved, like there's also another organization, so it's called Out Christian. I'd say like we're definitely for us, we're definitely more focused on like the social aspect, or the community social aspect of things. Like I just came back this weekend from our Out in Faith gathering in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I had fun writing and running a liturgy, and I stressed out a little bit about it, but it ended up being beautiful in the end, and I will go with that. I haven't made it on these two, but they also managed to get on a cruise every summer. So I think this year they're heading out to, what is it? No, not the Bahamas, Bermuda, but yeah.
That's cool. That's a good way a cruise is a very good location of, you can be able to separate from each other, go do your own thing, come back, and have meals and do things together as much as you want to. Because sometimes on like a retreat and you're in the same household, it's like, man, I need to get away for a minute, but I really can't.
Yeah. I've never hated a cruise myself, but it also, like, from anyone else's descriptions of it, it also sounds like it's like, okay, this is completely outside of the real world. So it's entirely. Like, yeah,
it is. I've been on two, and I love and hate them at the same time. It's just one of those weird oddities of it, and we're not going to go into that weird side tangent and everything, because it's, as with always, there's always little side roads you can go on. But I steer the boat back in here. But you haven't had any puns lately. You haven't been very punny on this one, and it's been kind of weird. I feel like you've been holding back on us on that.
I don't know about that. It's just, I don't know. Like it hasn't had a chance to super organically come up just yet, I don't think.
Well, in the previous episode as well that we had you on, you maybe threw like one or two out there.
Yeah. I try to be judicious.
Well, coming back, steering that boat back in here, is what advice can you offer family and friends who see their queer friends who are struggling with their faith and want to kind of encourage them to approach their relationship with faith again? Because a lot of the times the communities, like in general throughout life, it doesn't matter if you're queer or straight or whatever connotation you want to call yourselves, we all lose our paths, and it's hard to find your way back. What are some suggestions that you could be able to offer?
Yeah. So the first thing, I mean, the first thing I think I need to say here, which I think it sounds obvious, but it's not necessarily. When it comes down to it, it's don't force anything. People need to approach things on their own time, at their own pace, in their own comfortability. And if you're trying to especially when it comes to things like religion, if you try to force anything on somebody, that may well end up having exactly the opposite effect than the one you want. You just gotta you've just got to understand that this is something that is not within your control, nor should it be. Of course, it's fully on them. The best you can do, I'd say, from that point, I'd say the best you can do is like, I mean, one, just be supportive, and make it clear that that support is going to come no matter what this person's relationship with any kind of faith might be. Just the support is there. And two, it's also like, I mean, it's basically just from there, you guys just be ready. I mean, be ready to talk about whatever you need to, even if it's going to be uncomfortable. But again, let whoever you are thinking of, like, approach you in their own time. You can definitely make overtures to let anybody know that, hey, if you ever want to talk about this, or if you ever want me to sit with you while we figure something out about this, or what have you, like that, like, that's okay. I would do that very clearly, and perhaps once. From there, you've just got to let things run their course. Like, that's outside of your the ball is not in your court from there.
That's always a good way. That is advice for all realms there with coming back into faith. It's always you could always overdo it. You could always overdo it for sure. As we start to kind of wrap things down here, is there anything that I didn't kind of cover or poke or ask about that you're like, hey, I want to talk about that real quick, Kate. You dropped the ball here. Let me pick up the ball here and kind of and steer us back.
I don't know if I'd say there's anything that you really dropped on or anything. I mean, honestly, I think we've been having a pretty good conversation here. As far as anything else I would like put out there for people to think about, I mean, it's just one. Queerness may be something completely different to what you've ever known, or ever have, or will experience, and it's a beautiful thing. And sometimes and just like with many other things in life, is your role in that is to just be there and observe it, rather than intervening too heavily. The other thing I would think about there is just, I mean, I feel like we shouldn't need to be reminded of this, but recent goings on in many state legislatures over the country are basically, including my own, are basically reminding me of that people need to hear this and take it to heart again. It's just be kind to people. Just because something is different to you, or what you know, or what you're used to, or what you like, just because something is different does not mean it's bad and should be stamped out. There's a lot of this stuff that's just like, this really, quite honestly, the only reason this affects you at all is simply that you don't like it, and that's not a good enough reason to go stomping over people and uprooting people's lives. So just be kind to others.
That's a great life lesson, as I think we mentioned last time. Be kind to everybody. That's a great moral at any given point in time. You used the words there on just because it's different. I'm going to rephrase here of a phrase that I use every day in my classroom. And I say, there's two things you should learn before you leave my classroom. Just because it's different doesn't always mean it's wrong. And number two, there are three sides to a coin. With anything in life, you always have to look at those different experiences, different situations and stuff. And before you make a quick, rash decision, spend time with it. Look at it, examine the situation. And our most dangerous weapon that we have is our words. Hands down. Words start wars.
Agreed.
And can damage relationships and damage everything all around the world for it. It's just all it takes is one or two words that can be able to kind of change the world in positive and negative.
Absolutely. Absolutely there.
Is there any other last minute words of wisdom? We dropped a lot of wisdom there. I will say that. You dropped a lot of great knowledge there. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention that maybe that you want to talk about in general that may not have been on the topic we had today, but just in general that you want to kind of throw out there for people?
Yeah. Support Cade. He's awesome. He's cool. I like hearing his voice, and you should like it too. Support trans people, support trans kids. They're really under attack right now. Support queer people over. Who knows? You might be one yourself and you haven't even examined it yet. So be kind to yourself also. And even just independently of everything else like that, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Do something kind for yourself and for someone else before you go to bed today.
I agree. Georgia is really under attack right now as well within that community. And it makes me sad seeing that entirely. And we're not going to go down the political roads here, but get out, vote, make your stances here. If you don't like something, you can help make that change that you want to see. And you have to exercise your voice that you were given here. And change comes in numbers. That's the big thing at the end of the day. Change comes in numbers. So call.
Indeed. We can't do this alone.
Call, talk to your senators, talk to your representatives, go to your local community meetings, sit down and learn what's going on around you. Spend time with it because this is your world that you live in. And the more that you become kind of numb to it and don't stand up to it, the more it's not going to change. It's just going to continue down that path. So find your voice somehow.
And if you got to be the squeaky wheel and you can be the squeaky wheel, then I implore you to do it.
There's a reason why the United States exists. And other countries exist too, because they kind of took that step forward and made that change that they were looking for. Politicians don't become into office just in general because they may be the right place, the right time. They spent the time and the effort putting in the moments, talking to the people, getting a gathering, and making it to where the position that they're at. Great little kind of they're going into an end as well. So, well, everyone, have a lovely, good afternoon, morning, day, week, month, year, decade, wherever route you want to go down with it. Listeners, thank you for coming in and spending your time with us. If you enjoyed the episode, share it with a friend, share it with your neighbor, talk to people. The best way to get this to spread for other people to listen to is generally word of mouth. That is the biggest advertisement that you can be able to give out there. Share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter, share it on social media, whatever you feel. I deeply appreciate that whenever you do that. So rock and roll. If you would like to reach out to me or have questions that you would like to kind of connect in to Kalevi on, email me and I'll pass it forward. And if Kalevi feels like, hey, I'll just send you a message back and you forward it, I'll do that. Or if he wants me to kind of connect you together, we can do it that way. But I want to respect his privacy as well. So to reach out to me, my email is Cade, which is spelled CADE at learningfromfriends.com. I have a Facebook page. I have a Twitter page. You can be able to reach out to me that way as well. I have a Patreon page if you would like to sit back and make a donation as well. I would appreciate $1, $5, $10, $1 million, $1 billion. If you don't ask, you don't know. That's the whole thing at the end of the day. Elon Musk, donate me $1 billion. We'll roll with it. But oh gosh, that was fun. But as you leave here, my name is Cade Curtis, your tour guide on this lovely adventure that I like to call Learning from Friends. Most of all, as you leave, don't forget, get your curiosity. Fly high.